Balotelli, Aguero!
Hello and welcome back to another episode of one of the greatest podcasts going around, the On The Ball Potty, and we are back again to talk about the NRL this week, NRL Round 17 review / Round 18 preview, also a bit of State of Origin chat. I am just off the back of an hour and a half AFL episode, so forgive me if my brain's a little bit fatigued, but I will try and be on my best game because I've been looking forward to this one for a few days now. I've done a bit of research and some new interesting topics today, some good discussion points. So, stay tuned as we will get into that in a little bit. But we will start off by reviewing round 17 and the State of Origin that happened last night for me, recording this, and we'll also just discuss some of the headlines going around in the sport right now. So, first of all, Raiders versus the Sea Eagles. The Raiders won 30-16. Now, I didn't see this coming, to be honest. I know without Turbo, the Manly are a different team, and without DC, that's obviously huge as well. But the last time they did that, they beat the Cowboys by 40 points, and I think I talked about it in length on the show that I thought they would win pretty comfortably, but Raiders put up a good showing, and look, they didn't look great, but with backup halves and Sam Williams and Matt Frawley, I think they did pretty serviceably, and to get a win over a top 6 team, especially in the NRL at this point where the top 6 are very, very dominant. Any win over them is very, very good. And I guess theoretically it keeps them alive in the race for 7th and 8th. They're very outside chances and they're well and truly not in my picture, but I'm sure that's what they're thinking of. Also, looking ahead to next year, they've still got a very, very good team on paper. Not that dissimilar to the team that, made the grand final 2 years ago. So they'll be looking to pick up some momentum going into next year, and there's a few players there pushing for international claims in the World Cup at the end of the year. So, they've still got a lot to play for, and that's a very, very good win. I think there's about 7 rounds left, and if they can get that momentum going, they could be a dangerous team in the next few weeks. That led us into the Rabbitohs versus the Cowboys on Friday night. The Rabbitohs won 46-18. The Cowboys started pretty well, and I was actually struck with a dilemma of whether to go to the movies with my brother or not. And the Cowboys started well, and I was like, oh no, I'm going to go to the movies and miss game of the year. Did go to the movies, then the Rabbitohs smashed them from then on. So I made the right call, but the first half was pretty entertaining, back and forth game. The Rabbitohs did look like they were just waiting to crack that defense, but the Cowboys were holding on well. You do have to say the Rabbitohs are seriously... They do benefit a lot in the Origin period because a lot of the other top teams lose key players, and obviously Latrell and Gagai are very important, but they're still pretty much there with their full halves, most of their outside backs and all that stuff. So, they made that very apparent with a dominant display. I know there was some controversy over a sin bin to one of the Cowboys players, and then apparently it happened about 10 minutes later, the exact same thing. And they have gone very soft on the head highs. I do think they've gone too far the other way again. I think the people were complaining too much. I think there's room for it in the game. Obviously, it was too extreme at Magic Round, but I do have to say it's taken a lot of the head highs out of the game. We now really only see one every 2 or 3 games, and pardon me. Probably should be sin bin, but I do understand why they've taken a few steps back, but I would like to see a few players go to the bin every now and then because it seems like it's impossible to go to the bin now, as we saw in State of Origin last night where teams were just giving away 6 penalties at a time and nothing was happening. But yeah, fair play to the Rabbits, too good, and they still look like they're going to be a dangerous team in finals. But quickly shout out to Jason Tamalolo. There's been a bit of talk about the way he's been deployed by Todd Payten. He only played 50 minutes, which I actually don't mind. I think it's pretty stupid to expect a middle forward to play 80 minutes and be impactful the whole 80. We've seen it with the likes of, a Pangai Jr. They've made him play on an edge now to get a consistent 80 minutes from him. And arguably that takes his impact away from the game. However, I think that suits Pangai, but Tamalolo is a different case. I think playing 50 to 60 minutes in the middle is where he belongs, and I think that's a good amount of time. I think 80 minutes, his impact was lost, and I think Todd Payten's been quoted in saying that he's doing this for the long term as well. He's not going to have a long career if he plays 80 minutes every week in the middle. So, and he was back to his damaging best. He had 132 metres in the first 30 minutes, 2 big line breaks, one set up a contender for try of the year, to be honest, that he he broke the line straight up the middle, ran about 50 metres, produced a flick pass offload, and then they went and scored from that. So that was a very good try. There were some great celebrations on show. I know Blake Taffy scored a try and he jumped into the rowing boat, and that made for some good entertainment. And then that moved us into Saturday, obviously only the 4 games on the weekend. Bulldogs versus the Roosters. Roosters just won by 6 points, which was pretty surprising, and maybe shows that the Roosters are a fair way off those other 5 teams in the top 6, and they're maybe closer to the likes of the Sharks, the Dragons, and stuff like that. But the Bulldogs, you have to say to them, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, maybe the last 6 even, they've been pretty competitive, and they've done this the last few years, really, where they've hit a decent patch of form in the end of the season. And obviously you want to see them start winning, but it's an exciting time to be a Bulldogs fan. They keep signing players. They've signed Matt Duffy now. They've pretty much got a new whole spine rolling in next year with a lot of State of Origin players coming. Addo Carr's coming, Burton's coming, Naden's coming, which we'll talk about in a segment in a little bit. So yeah, I guess it's not all doom and gloom for the Bulldogs. Obviously the main talking point from this game, ridiculously, was Sam Walker's last 20-second tactic of running backwards. Absolutely no idea why this was a talking point. He's well within his rights to do that. Who cares? People saying it's disrespectful. Not sure how. It's in the rules. It's not offensive to anyone, in my opinion. People saying it's a dumb play. I actually think it's a smart play. And if you think it's a dumb play, well then who cares? Unless you're a Roosters fan, if you think he's risking the game for his team, well then he should be free to do it without criticism. I'm sure he won't do it again, which is annoying because, it's fun to see players innovating in the game. And also, I actually have seen a lot of players do similar sort of thing. Maybe not run backwards and run around in circles, but I've definitely seen Benji Marshall run past the touchline or out of the sideline 3 or 4 times in his career. So I don't remember people bagging that out. So not really sure why it's a big issue. To me, it was a very smart play, and I actually thought Queensland were going to do it in Origin last night, but they didn't quite do that. So, yeah. Fair play to Sam Walker. Bit of a larrikin, really, for doing that. That moved us into the Sunday game, which I thought was going to be game of the week. Sort of disappointed a little bit. Could maybe argue that. The Sharks won 20-12 against the Warriors. And I don't want to be rude to the Sharks. They're probably a little bit underrated, but look, they're just a boring team. Anytime the Sharks win a game, it's never really entertaining. The Warriors probably deserved to win, but they just couldn't break the Sharks' defense in the final 20. So yeah, that was disappointing. I was going for the Warriors heavily. They seem to be... Look, Reece Walsh is a great player, one of the best talents I've ever seen in my life, but they seem to be going too far into him. Cody Nikorima hardly got the ball on creative plays. It seemed to just be like, where's Reece Walsh on the last tackle? And at times he overforced his hand, which is going to happen for a young kid. And that's why I think the likes of Nikorima needs to step up. I know they don't really have another half at the moment. I think Chad Townsend might be coming back this week. But yeah, I think Nikorima definitely needs to get more involved this weekend, and Walsh needs to sort of be a luxury play, maybe gets the ball once a set sort of, and he's a bit more unpredictable, and then Nikorima controls the game rather than being the other way around. Thought Roger was really good with his touches off the wing, got involved in the right moments, and yeah, I think he scored a try up the middle of the pitch as well, which is always good to see from Roger. Really sad that Roger won't be able to play another game back in New Zealand. Obviously, the latest COVID outbreaks in Sydney and Melbourne now have basically, they have officially cancelled the Warriors' return home, which is shattering for both the New Zealand public and also the Warriors players. Sucks that he won't get a send-off in New Zealand, but I guess they'll see him play rugby union next year. Quick shout out to Braden Hamlin ULE for that Dwayne The Rock Johnson celebration. Easily the front runner for best celebration of the month. I have to say, they should make this a yearly thing. This month of tries. I was saying to my family, maybe they should do it just a weekend, like not doesn't have to be on Magic Round. It could be if you want, but maybe a different round, and then every try celebration wins charity, and the person who comes up with the best celebration can maybe win $50,000 to the charity of their choice, something like that. I think it's a pretty cool idea. I don't think it's like disrespectful or anything. People are all doing it in good taste. It's for a good cause. So yeah, and it just adds a bit more entertainment, especially in, like a Rabbitohs game where it's a bit of a blowout. It's interesting to see what celebrations they're going to come up with. And I'm sure the kids at home are loving it. All right, then moving on to State of Origin. Last night, Queensland unfortunately pipped my mighty New South Wales Blues 20-18. And look, I actually knew this was going to happen, and it's pretty disappointing. Although we won the series, it just would have been so nice to get a clean sweep after so many years of being dominated. It would have been a bit of we would have been putting our flag back down in terms of we are still a really, really good team, and we're not going to be dominated for the rest of time. So yeah, that was a little bit disappointing, but anyway, we still won the series. Can't really argue with that. Well played to Queensland. They looked a lot better last night, and I guess well done to Paul Green, first win in the Origin arena. In terms of the New South Wales team selection, I think they did pretty well. People are bagging out Moses and Whiten, but I think they did well. I don't think Adam Reynolds or someone would have done much more. I think in the second half, they could have gone to Latrell a bit more. He was, for me, easily the best player of the series, the most dangerous with ball in hand, and he hardly touched it in the second half, really. They just didn't go to him. But yeah, they sort of seemed to calm Tedesco's influence a little bit. Turbo wasn't as impactful, so yeah, Queensland really well defended. New South Wales defended really well as well. They defended 3 or 4 sets at a time on their line. I do think the ref was a bit of a weak ref. I think someone should have been sin-binned. I'm not really too much of a complainer. Everyone's mad about how many set restarts. I don't really care because it was going both ways. But when there's that many penalties, someone should get sin-binned because that's the point of the rule. He gave someone a warning, which you don't have to do anymore unless Origin rules are different, which I don't think they are. And yeah, Turbo won the Wally Lewis Medal Player of the Series. He was good in game 1, but I have to say, for me, Latrell was in the top 3 players in each match, and I don't think Turbo was. So I think Latrell was seriously unlucky there. I was pretty disappointed when they gave it to Turbo because I think Latrell deserved it. But yeah, that's Origin for another year. Last night just showed the passion is still there. People were maybe hinting at, Origin's dead. When Queensland lose, Origin's dead. All this rubbish. New South Wales are going to dominate for years. Last night showed there's still passion in it. There was a lot of argy-bargy. Queensland is still a really good team, and it's still one of the greatest rivalries in world sport. Next up, we've got the Queensland hub situation. Obviously, all the Sydney teams and Newcastle and Canberra moved up into the hubs. Melbourne are still in Melbourne for now. Not sure if they're evacuating this morning because we've had a few cases. Really disappointing news. It's getting pretty frustrating for everyone involved, but there's not much we can do. I was really looking forward to going to the Storm versus the Knights on the weekend. Thought it was going to be a really good game. Very slim chance of that going ahead now, at least with fans. But it's what we've got to do to keep the game going. Sean Johnson said we should go to New Zealand. That would be really cool. I just think logistically it's a little bit harder than just going up the road to Brisbane, Southeast Queensland. Worked last year for a few teams, so I think it is probably just the better play. And hopefully it's not for too long. Hopefully it's only for 2 or 3 weeks or something, and New South Wales can sort their stuff out. But yeah, I guess it's got to be done. Feel bad for the players. Feel worse for the staff and stuff because, they're not on the big bucks that the players are, and they're still making the same sacrifices. So shout out to those kind of people, the administrators and the staff, but also to the players. I do understand they are human, and some of them are leaving their families behind. So hopefully it's not too long, as that way we can get back to our home grounds, get back into the hubs. And then final point of discussion is the Tigers documentary premiering on Fox League next Monday night. And geez, I am scared as a Tigers fan. It's going to be really, really interesting. I think the trailer looks very exciting. It looks like never seen before TV in the rugby league world. Bit late to this whole documentary trend, I have to say, but Australia is usually kind of late to that stuff. So yeah, well done to the Tigers for allowing that access. I think it's going to be really, really compelling viewing for all. I have to say, I'm ready for the slander that we're going to cop. I can already see it now. We lose to the Broncos on Sunday. We watch episode 1 of the documentary, and Monday night on Twitter is just about abusing Tigers, saying, why would you waste your money on a bad team like the Tigers? But hey ho, it'll make interesting viewing. I think it's probably more like I think we've seen with maths and stuff on TV that unfortunately sometimes negative drama is more interesting than positive drama. So yeah, I'm sure they made the documentary in hopes that the Tigers broke their finals drought, but it's kind of gone sour. But we'll see how they go. I think my prediction is that Madge comes out of it looking very, very good. That generally is the case. I know that happened in the AFL one where most of the coaches came out of it looking like very, very good leaders. But yeah, it's going to be really, really interesting to see. Moving into my top 8 predictions, I've made a couple changes. From last week, I've lifted the Eels up into 4th. I had them 5th below the Sea Eagles last week, but I've lifted them back above them this week. I just think they're too good, and the buffer in points right now is just too great for me. The Sea Eagles lost last week. I think it's now a 6-point buffer or something like that, and I don't see the Sea Eagles making the difference in the short time that's left in the season. And I've swapped the Sharks and Knights around. I had the Knights 7th, the Sharks 8th last week, and this week I'm swapping them around. Got them still finishing just ahead of the Titans, and the Dragons. I think the Warriors, Tigers, and Cowboys are just a bit too inconsistent, and they don't really have that lethal edge to finish teams off. But I've got the Sharks in at 7th. They just seem to rack up wins. They like to win ugly, but they get the 2 points. And then the Knights, I think they're going to be a bit of a dangerous side if they come up against a Roosters or a Manly or even a Parramatta in finals. I think they could cause some damage. So I'm excited to see how they go in the rest of the season. But that is my top 8. All right, moving into the main meat and potatoes of my episode today. I'll be discussing the top 10 free agents moving into next year, and I'll also be discussing the 10 best transfers for me so far. So this is premature. There's obviously a lot of the transfer window to go, but I thought I would just address it halfway because it's interesting because, after Origin, this is where we sort of not start to look to next year, but a lot of the teams down the bottom of the ladder start to look at how they can improve for next year. I think there's still time. I think you can actually sign up to August this year, mid-season top-up, so maybe these players are relevant for the big clubs as well. So honourable mentions go to Edric Lee. Still think he has the potential to be a very, very good winger if he played for a good club or a centre, whichever position he plays. He's a big, tall player. Struggled with injury this year. Not sure if he's going to play in the back end for the Knights. Nari Tuwala, only 22 years old. I think he's a pretty serviceable centre for the Knights. Doesn't get much traction, but I think he's a solid player. Curtis Sirenen sort of lost his position at Manly. He started the season injured. Schuster seems to have taken his role there, and they've got Ola Kawatu and Lawton now, rotating through that back row. So it looks like Ciro's time at Manly could be up, but there was a period a couple of years ago where he wasn't too far off the New South Wales selection, and he's not the youngest player now, but I think he would still do a pretty serviceable role for the next few years. Mitch Kenny, young hooker at Penrith, not going to get much game time at Penrith if Coruscant stays there, and Coruscant's still got a few years ahead of him, so he's played a lot of games this year, so they might be interested in keeping him as a backup, but there's teams like the Bulldogs and stuff who don't really have a hooker, so a well-renowned hooker. So if, Mitch Kenny could, get some more game time there. Ray Stone is also someone else who we haven't seen too much of him, really. He's sort of been in and out of that Parramatta bench. He's dealt with a few injuries and suspensions and stuff, but whenever I've watched him, I thought he's been a really impactful player off the bench. He's not too young. I think he's 24, but I think at the right club, he could be a dangerous player, whether it be off the bench or starting. He seems to bring a lot of energy and passion to the game. All right, now time for my top 10. I've weighed ages into this pretty heavily because, well, to me anyway, I know it's a little bit different because if you're signing them on a 2-year contract or something, it doesn't matter if they're 21 or 27, you're still going to get them in their prime. You're not signing them for the rest of their career, but I have weighted that into it because, you can sign a 23-year-old for a 6-year contract where you're not going to sign a 29-year-old for a 6-year contract. So I have weighed that into it. I've also weighed in a lot of stuff, really. So let's get into it. Number 10, I've got Tyrone May, 25 years old. He can play any position, really, and that's what makes him an interesting prospect. He is a natural half, you'd have to say, but he's played hooker, he's played centre, he's played back row. He's spent a few years at that Penrith elite system now. He's obviously been there since a junior, but he's been there since they've become elite. So he's obviously been very well trained, but he's not really going to get a starting spot in that team, is he? So unless they see him as a centre in the future, and when Burton leaves, he's going to play centres. I think he could be an interesting gamble for a team, and it is exactly that. It's a gamble. We haven't really seen him start week in, week out. When he started in the Origin period, when Luai and Cleary went there, he didn't dominate, but he's got the talent, and he could be an interesting pickup if a team want to take a risk on a player, especially now with the trend in, smaller players playing in the middle. He could play as a 14. He could very well and truly do a Connor Watson-esque role. Number 9, I've got Billy Smith. I didn't realise this, but he played his first game last week in ages. I think he's done a couple knees and stuff. He's only 21, but I remember, I think he might have been 18 or 19 at the time. He kind of burst onto the scene at the Roosters, and he was a really exciting prospect. I remember every time he played, he really impressed me, and I think he scored a try last week on his return. So he's going to be someone to watch for the rest of the year, especially now that Swali's out for the season. Smith is all but locked up one of those centre spots. Actually, that could be a lie, because it could be Josh Morris and Joey Manu, but with injuries and stuff, he's going to more than likely get a fair few cracks at it. So he's going to be one to watch. I think he could be a very, very interesting player for a lower club to pick. I don't think he would demand much wages, and I think he has this bright future in the game, especially right now where there doesn't seem to be too many centres going around. A lot of the centres playing in the Origin arena and international game aren't actually centres, so I'd be surprised if someone didn't snap him up pretty quick, especially a player coming out of the Roosters. Number 8, I got Tex Hoy. He's only 21. He had big raps last year, but I have to say he has not lit the world on fire, and it's a game built for fullbacks. So if you come into the competition and you don't really have an impact on games as a fullback, you're probably not the greatest player. That's pretty savage for me to say, but he's only 21 and is a skillful player. So I would be surprised if someone didn't take a risk on him, even if it's just for development. Next, I got Tyrone Peachey on the other end of the age scale. He's 29, but I do think in the last 2 or 3 years, he's played some of his best footy at the Titans. They've really found his role as a bit of a lock middle forward, but he doesn't seem needed there anymore. They've signed Isaac Liu, who's likely going to play lock, and they probably want to shore up their defence a little bit, so maybe they question his defence. But if he could go to a bigger club who just needs a bit more creativity out of that lock position, he could be the perfect candidate. Number 6, I got Dill Walker, 26 years old, bit of a resurgence this year in his career. At the start of the season, he wasn't having much impact at fullback. He looked really out of place, but since his return from injury, he's had a couple games at halfback. He's come in a middle forward position off the bench, and he's been electric. So he's shown that he still has a lot to give in his NRL career, and I think a lot of clubs would be very, very happy to add him to the books, only 26 years old. Next, I've got Ash Taylor, 26 years old. Interested to see what the Titans do here. They do really like Tanner Boyd, and you would think they're going to stick with Jamal Fogarty at halfback for a few years to come, but they haven't re-signed Ash Taylor yet, and they have signed a lot of players, so I'm not sure how much salary cap they have to spend. Maybe they see the future is Brimson at 6 and Jaden Campbell at fullback, which would be an interesting move. But it doesn't look like Ash Taylor's future is at the Titans, and I think he's an interesting player. I think a big club like the Roosters or something, I know they've got Sam Walker coming in, and they've got Luke Keary, so maybe there's not a spot for him there, but a team like the Roosters where the rest of the team is pretty set up, but they just could use a bit of an icing on the cake. So, yeah, he's an interesting player. A bit of a gamble, would probably need a fairly decent salary, which isn't ideal for a gamble, but I think he's an interesting prospect. Number 4, this would definitely be a pot of an opinion. I don't think many people would share this with me, but I've got Tessie New in at number 4, only 19 years old, and he's already played pretty much a season and a half of first grade. He's only recently starting to show the ability that he has. He's always had high raps, but his defense, especially in the centres, came into question on a lot of occasions, but he's played fullback the last 3 or 4 games and he's looked really, really good. He's shown a creative ability ever since his debut in the top grades, and the Broncos have basically shown their faith in him. They've picked him over Sarko. They basically told Walsh that he's free to go. He's not going to get a game in first grade, and this was all with Tessie New in the background. And I know there's obviously other factors behind it, but that obviously shows the level that they rate Tessie New. And the fact that they haven't re-signed him is very interesting because maybe they don't rate him that much. Maybe I've just contradicted myself. But if I was a big club, maybe with the room, for a development spot in that number 30, I would happily jump on him. Or even if I was a lower club, because I don't think he's going to demand much money unless he tears up the back half of this year. And he's only 19. So I think Tessie New is a very, very interesting prospect. Number 3, I've got Dane Gagai. He's 30, but I think he's playing some of the best footy of his career. I think this year he's been really, really good for the Rabbitohs. He was still pretty good for Queensland in Origin. And if he can go another 3 or 4 years, I think he could be a really, really solid player for a team that wants him. As I mentioned before, centres is a very in-demand position right now. The centres are always changing year after year. So I think Dane Gagai would be a very, very good pickup by any club, really. Number 2, I've got Dale Finucane, one of the most talked about free agents currently. I think he'd be number 1 for a lot of people, but his age has put him at number 2 for me. He's 29. He's a middle forward, so you could argue that they're going to play less for a shorter amount of time than like an outside back. But he's just a very, very good player. You know what he's going to give you. He's going to give you an 8 out of 10 performance every week. He's going to run 120 metres. He's going to make 30 tackles. He's just a real workman. And yeah, there's not really much else to say for Dale Finucane. Anyone who's a quality player out of the Storm, everyone always wants him. And it's going to be interesting to see where he ends up. Number 1, I've got Jaden Sewer. Probably a rogue opinion, but I really do rate this guy highly. I know he's fallen out of favour at the Rabbitohs in the last few months, but he's only 23. He's played State of Origin. He's arguably one of the best tacklers in the game. He just needs to add a little bit more offensive work rate, you'd have to say. He doesn't do many damaging runs. He's a back rower, so he's not really... he's not going to be charging up the middle of the game, charging up the middle of the ground, making a line break or anything. But you never really see Jaden Sewer getting onto the end of a flat ball, bursting through a hole, that sort of thing. So that's maybe something he can look to add on his game. But someone with a perfect tackling technique, only 23, already played Origin. He's been coached by Wayne Bennett, one of the greatest coaches of all time. I would be snapping Jaden Sewer up right now. And I think his wage would have taken a serious hit after his recent mission from the Rabbitohs team. So here's my number 1 free agent at the moment. So I'm going to be interested to see where he goes. Obviously linked to the Dragons, I think it is. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up, same as the rest of the 10 on that list. 10 best transfers so far. Obviously there's not been too many, so fleshing out a top 10 was a bit of a stretch. Now, 10 and 9, I've got Tigers players, so you could say this is biased, but the 2 Wigan boys, Gildart and Hastings, they're really surprise packages, as most Super League signings are for NRL clubs, but I'd assume they're not on a big salary packet, and I think they can add some much-needed class to this Tigers outfit. Hastings, whether he plays a middle forward role, whether he plays hooker, whether he actually does play in the halves, I think he's going to add something to the Tigers. He's going to, get the fans buzzing a little bit, and I'm interested to see what he does for the team. He's a very, very good on-field leader as well, and Gilbert's an exciting young centre, which is a position the Tigers really, really need to address. So I'm really, really interested to see how those 2 go next year. Number 8, I've got Brent Naden to the Dogs. He's sort of a forgotten man at Penrith. I thought he was a really, really influential player in their season last year, and he seemed like one of the most damaging centres in the game on the offensive side of the ball. So I think the Bulldogs have done pretty well to nab him. Obviously, we don't know the salary, so it's hard to judge them in terms of value. But I can see him being a pretty solid contributor to the Doggies. Number 7, I've got Matt Duffy. I think this would be higher in other people's lists, but not the biggest fan of Matt Duffy. He's a good player, but I don't think he's going to change the team as such, but he's definitely an upgrade of what they've currently got, and his pace is enough to make him a weapon at any time in the game. And I think he's going to be a solid addition to the Doggies backline. 6, I've got Adam Reynolds, similar to Dufty. I think a lot of people would have this higher, but I just think it's a little bit overrated. It's going to be interesting to see how he goes. I think there's enough talent around him for him to do well, but it's going to be interesting to see how he goes isolated from that Rabbitohs setup. Obviously, the Rabbitohs have surrounded him with a lot of talent his whole career, so he's sort of just had to be a game manager with a bit of a kicking game. So now it's going to be interesting to see whether he can be a bit more creative and, help a young side out. So that's going to be interesting to see. One that actually slipped through the cracks, I only saw this the other day, Peter Hiku to the Cowboys. For me, that's my number 5. I think Peter Hiku is a seriously underrated player. He had a ridiculous amount of try involvements last year, tries and try assists for the Warriors. This year, he's missed basically the whole year. I think he did his knee in round 1, but he's still got a fair few years left in him. I think he's only 26, 27, and I think that's a solid pickup from the Cowboys. Astute signing, I'd have to say. Number 4, I've got Xavier Coates, and if this wasn't the Melbourne Storm signing, it might be a little bit lower, but I can just see him absolutely carving it up for the Storm. They've had such success with tall outside backs, whether it be Vunivalu, whether it be Adokar, whether it be Inglis, whether it be Folau, and I can just see him dominating already. He's fast, he's tall, he's an athlete really. He can jump and jump on anyone's head pretty much. So he's just going to give them another dimension next year, which is pretty scary. Number 3, I've got Kurt Capewell, the Brisbane Broncos' other major signing so far. I think he's a pretty astute signing, and although back row, it's an arguable position to sign a good player because, sometimes back rowers don't have much impact on games, but I think Kurt Capewell is a very, very good player. We've seen it in the Origin arena. He's filled in at centre and he's been very, very good at that, and I think he's a very, very solid player, which is what the Broncos need right now. I think they've got enough flair and class and youth in their team, and I think they just need some solidity to fill out the rest of the positions, and they can hopefully nurture the upcoming talent. Number 2, I've got Nico Hines. It's going to be an interesting one for the Sharkies. It's a big risk. Sounds like he's on some good money after really only starring for 2 months for the Storm, but he was so impressive in those few rounds, and any player coming from the Storm, you sort of trust signing players from the Storm's a tough one because often they leave the Storm and they flop because they're not in that environment anymore. But for them to be at the Storm that long, they're obviously a very good character and they're obviously a very good player. So there's definitely upsides to signing him. And I think he's going to be a good addition. And he's going to play 6, you'd imagine. So it's going to be interesting to see how he kicks and stuff like that. We haven't seen too much of that. But I'd be excited if I'm a Sharkies fan. I think he brings a bit of class, which they lack right now. Maybe a bit harsh, but... And then number 1, I've got Matt Burton. I think this is an absolute steal from Trent Barrett. Not sure how much he's getting paid, but I think Burton's someone you could set your team up for the next 10 years. I think he's an incredible player. He's got a damaging boot. He's got a good running game. And although he's faltered a few times when given a halves berth for the Penrith Panthers, I think, that can be put down to a lack of experience. And I think when he's given the reins to a team all by himself, it might take a few weeks to adjust, a few years maybe. But I think in the long run, we're going to look back at this signing and say, geez, that was smart from Trent Barrett, and what a player Matt Burton's become, because I really think this kid is going to be an absolute freak. So that's my 10 best transfers so far in this, well, it's not even the NRL season, but so far this NRL season. All right, next up, we have the team lists. Just going to quickly run through the matchups. I actually haven't done my tips, so I'm going to be doing them live for you, which is a bit nerve-wracking, but we'll see how we go. So I'm going to run through the lineups and just quickly touch on the major changes to the teams and stuff like that. So Titans versus the Eels, the only real massive change here is Reid Marnie returns. Obviously, all the games are in the Gold Coast, Brisbane, and I think there's one in Townsville, so I won't really read out the venues because most of them are neutral games. This is the one of the few games at home. Oh, this is tough. By the way, Shout out to the NRL. Not sure why this is the 6 o'clock game. Wouldn't you put the Titans Eels as a primetime game? Give the Gold Coast folk time to get there from work. Anyway, that's just my opinion. Got to back in the Eels. Titans are too inconsistent for me to tip. And the Eels usually beat the teams you expect them to beat. So, I'll go the Eels. Not sure if Moses is playing. Not sure if any of the Origin players are playing. So, I won't really touch on that for every game because we're not sure what's happening there. But I'll go the Eels. Manly versus the Dragons. Turbo's pretty much guaranteed to be rested, but DC will play. Schuster's returning in the back row. Dylan Walker's being pushed to 14. For the Dragons, Jermaine Tanua-Brown makes his debut after coming on loan. Tyrell Sloan will play his second game at fullback after starring in his debut as Dufty serves his suspension. This is a tough one because Manly without Turbo are a different beast, but I do think that they will bounce back. They're a good team. I've seen them do it without Turbo before, and I think having DC, even without Turbo, makes a big difference. So I'm going to back in Manly here. Just don't trust the Dragons, really. Raiders versus Sharks, no big team news here. This is a tough one. If it was in Canberra, I'd maybe lean towards the Raiders, but I think the Sharks are actually in pretty decent form at the moment. They've had a good 4 or 5 weeks despite losing to the Broncos in the middle of that, but I'm going to back them in here. They didn't really have anyone involved in Origin, so I'm going to say the Sharkies get up. Cowboys, Roosters, Val Holmes is likely going to be out. He looked to have maybe done an AC joint injury, if I don't want to jump to conclusions for the Cowboys, so I'd assume Drinkwater goes to fullback, and then Dejan Arce moves it to 5'8" last week, as they did last week, and then for the Roosters, CSC Takiaho is out with, I think it's a hamstring issue. I'm going to go with the Roosters here. Just think, look, they've been winning dirty recently, but I think the Cowboys have really lost form, so going to be tipping the Roosters there. Storm versus Knights, the one major return or change is that Frizzell is back for the Knights, which is a big in. However, I don't think that changes the result. You can't tip against Storm or Penrith, can you, at the moment? Too good. Warriors versus Panthers, the first of a triple header, I think, on Sunday. Tohu Harris and Chad Townsend have been named in the reserve, so that's going to be an interesting one to watch for the Warriors. I think that changes a lot if they are named. Josh Curran and Kane Evans replace Ben Murdoch, Masala, and Jack Murchie. Dylan Edwards returns for the Panthers, and Jerome Luai is out his first game in Clubland with his injury. Look, I know the Panthers are undermanned. They don't have either half. And the Warriors, when you least expect it, they do get up. However, they are in really, really bad form. They've lost 7 of their last 8 or something. I could see them winning this, but I'm going to have to tip Penrith. As I mentioned before, you can't tip against the top 4 at the moment. It's really boring, but it's too hard to ignore. Broncos, Tigers. Tigers have a couple of debutants, Junior Pauga and Tui Simpkins. Don't know much about either of them, really. Pauga was a bit of a throbber in his young days at the Warriors, played 20s, suffered a couple of injuries, found himself at the Wynnum Manly Seagulls, and the Tigers picked him up halfway through this year. He's playing centre, so look, luckily for these guys, there's not really any pressure. Can't do much worse than the guys playing already. Tui Simpkins is a big middle forward, I believe, who came from North Queensland. Adam Dewey's been moved back to 6. Mbar's been placed on the bench, which I think is a good term. I think long-term, Dewey is a 6. I know people are saying he's a centre, but for me, he's too good to be in the centre. You want him touching the ball more than he does out in the centres. Everyone's tipping the Broncos. I'm actually going to back in the Tigers. Like, we are due for a dub, and I know everyone thinks the Tigers are shit, but we actually get a win every now and then. And I'm going to back us in to dub up. Going into the documentary, life's good. I think our season's actually not been as bad as everyone's saying, and I think everyone was overrating us coming into it. I tipped us to come 13th. I think we're sitting in 13th. It's been poor. Some of the showings have been disgraceful, but we do win some games, so I'm going to back us in. Rabbitohs versus the Bulldogs. The only real thing of note is that Jaden Ockenbaugh is returning. He's in the reserves right now, so he might play, might not, but you got to tip the Bunnies, unfortunately, for the Doggies. So it's going to be an interesting round of footy. Triple header on a Sunday, don't mind that at all. No Thursday night footy, as you've probably noticed. And yeah, well done to Queensland last night, got up, but obviously the Blues too good in the series, as we like to say. Good luck to all your teams for the weekend. Hopefully you all stay safe wherever you are listening around the world or watching around the world. Feel free to get around the potty and stuff. Always love hearing from you guys. And let me know with your thoughts about the weekend, and go the Tigers, really. Hopefully everyone enjoys the documentary on Monday night. Don't roast the Tigers, please. We roast ourselves enough. And yeah, good luck to all your teams and enjoy the footy. Cheers.